That was a nice move by Pipkins, taking it right to the rack himself. Wide open three, left wing, and it's good. Nylon, the dunk likes that, Matt.
A three from the right side, and it's good! The one, Pipkins, the man, yet again.
Hello and welcome to the Flex. I'm Matt St. Jean.
This is Joe Howie.
And we got a special episode for you. It's that time of year. It's Big East tournament time. Big East tournament is this week, so this is going to be your intro to the tournament episode. We got a lot on the docket. We've got the Big East first and second teams being announced. We're going to talk about those and our thoughts on who's on them. And we've got the tournament starting this week, so the Friars are going to play against DePaul Wednesday, 9 o'clock that night. It's the projected starting time. To go with that, we have the end of the regular season. So we're going to recap a little bit of what happened, the standings, how that played out, and the matchups that we're going to see on Wednesday and Thursday. Talk about that a little bit, but we are going to start with the All-Big East first team and the All-Big East second team. Notable in Friartown for a big reason. Neither David Duke nor Nate Watson was named to the first team. Both fell to the second team. Personally, I would say that at least one of these guys was snubbed. How did you feel, Joe?
Well, Matt, all that glitters is not gold. Yesterday, Friars fans were ecstatic that we were able to knock off, or really survive and knock off 10th ranked Villanova at home to cap off the regular season. But less than 24 hours, Friar fans were extremely disappointed to find that our two stars, our two of the five leading scorers in the Big East, were named to the second team. Nate and Duke, obviously. I think the consensus across the entire fan base is that these two guys were snubbed. You and I both put out a series of tweets about this to the chagrin of many St. John's and Creighton fans. I don't know if St. John's fans, why they feel so attacked. Maybe they feel Julian Champagne wasn't deserving and they feel lucky to have him there. And I think Creighton fans are like, they know Marcus Zagorowski wasn't as great as he was predicted to be, and they feel lucky that he's there. But statistically, David Duke was the better guard than all three of them, Bouknight, Zagorowski, and Gillespie. I mean, if you want to look at the Duke-Gillespie matchup, Duke led Gillespie in almost every single statistical category with the exception of assist-to-turnover ratio and free throws. Yeah. Why is Duke on the second team?
Yeah, and to backtrack for a second, the guys named to the first team, it's Marcus Zagorowski, James Bouknight, Julian Champagne, Sandro Mamukelashvili, Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, and Colin Gillespie. All great players. And that's the thing. You play in a conference like the Big East, you go down. I mean, there's a couple guys on the second team other than Duke and Watson that you could probably make an argument deserve to be on the first team as well. There's a lot of talent, and that's 6 players on the first team. It's supposed to be 5, but there's a tie, so the 6th guy gets up there. But I'm with you. I think my issue falls, one, with Bouknight not having played that many games for UConn, especially not in conference play. He looked
Small
fantastic.
Sample size.
Yeah, I mean, Bouknight played like that all season. Not only is he first team, he's Big East Player of the Year, no doubt about it. There's no doubts about his talent or ability, but small sample size. Zagorowski, Big East Preseason Player of the Year. He had a very good season. He did not have a Big East Player of the Year season. And Colin Gillespie is kind of in the same boat to me. He had a very, very good season. Solid. And if you didn't have a guy like David Duke on the second team, then Gillespie and Zagorowski put him up there first team. Absolutely. Duke had more points, assists, and rebounds per game than both of those guys. So one of them should be knocked off the list.
Yeah, Matt. And again, just to emphasize your disclaimer, we're not saying that any of these guys are bad or had bad seasons, but I mean, you're drowning in honey when it comes to the all Big East first team selections, because these are all good players that are deserving and worthy of the spot. But if you look at a one-on-one comparison with a lot of them, we'll stick with the guards for the purpose of the podcast, and Bouknight, Zagorowski, and Gillespie, and you compare them to Duke. The argument can be made for Duke in place of all three of these guys, and vice versa. I think, like we said with Bouknight, the biggest argument is sample size. Obviously, his impact once he returned for Connecticut speaks volumes. What did they go 10-2 over the span once he returned? and they were
Something like
4-4 before that.
Yeah.
So obviously that player is very important, and he plays an integral part in what Connecticut has done in the latter half of the conference. But sample size, Duke played the full season. Booknight did not. Now, obviously, the kid didn't plan to have an injury, but that should be taken into account.
Yeah.
Zagorowski and Gillespie, great, efficient players, but statistically not as strong as Duke. Now, you could the counter argument is that Duke is not as efficient. He turns the ball over more. Okay, how many did either of those guys have multiple 30-point performances? I don't think so.
And Duke's a
Did
guy. I
Gillespie
mean,
even reach 30?
and Duke's a guy who's better than both of them from beyond the arc, and he gets assists too. It's not like he's totally inefficient. And there's flaws in David Duke's game, but in my eyes, he was a first team guy. The other guy, Nate Watson. I mean, to me, he's a first team player. I just don't know who you bump to put him up there. There's again, like you said, drowning in honey. There's so many good big men in the Big East. It's really pick your poison, and you got 3 elite big men. Only 2 of them can fit on that top list. Unfortunately, Watson's the guy that gets knocked off.
I think, and I'm going to credit big Janathan Papa Watson on this one. Nate is the single best true center in the conference right now. So to compare him to Mamu and Robinson Earl, who are essentially power forwards that play big or play small, it's almost not fair, you know? Like to say, oh, these guys are better bigs. Like, okay, well, do they have the same traditional back to the basket center type game that Nate does? No. But they take 3-pointers and they're better ball handlers. So that warrants them on there. And Julian Champagne is another guy. Realistically, Champagne should be Big East most improved, considering St. John's is the most improved team in the Big East. But he was also the conference's leading scorer, so I'm sure that bumps him up there as well. And Friar fans know all too well that he's a BIT star to play against.
Yeah, I mean, Champagne's a really good player. He's the one guy on this list. Nobody's going to have a problem with Champagne being on here.
Right.
Just as the 3 in this lineup, he deserves this spot. And Mamu and Robinson Earl deserve it too. It's just, I mean, it's apples and oranges comparing those guys to Watson, like you said. One's a traditional 5, the other guys are in that modern NBA style. And it's all about what you value. I'd be interested in seeing what the votes were. They decide this based on votes from the coaches. And coaches can't vote for their own players. But Mamu and Robinson Earl were both unanimous selections here. So, I mean, that says a lot about how the coaches in the Big East feel about how hard it is to play against those guys. I mean, that means Ed Cooley's saying that both of these guys deserve first team. And if Ed Cooley's saying that, I do trust his opinion on that. So, I mean, there's a lot of talent here. It's hard to Duke should have been on the first team. Watson, first team caliber player, not enough spots to go around.
Not to mention, spoiler alert here, I think Mamu has the best case right now for Big East Player of the Year. I don't think Zagorowski's, I guess his individual season resume is not strong enough. Same with Gillespie, same with Robinson Earl. I think Mamu should easily take the cake here. I'm interested to see how Colin Gillespie's injury is going to play into the voting process, because this is going to sound terrible. I feel like he's going to get sympathy votes, because the narrative is now he's so important to what Villanova does, right? And we saw that yesterday. They didn't have an orchestrator. They didn't have someone to lead the pack. Their faith is in Caleb Daniels now if Justin Moore doesn't come back. But I'm interested to see who will get Big East Player of the Year, because it should be Mamu, but Zagorowski and Gillespie are also knocking on the door. Also Booknight.
Yeah, and I think Champagne should be in that conversation too. We know Ed Cooley voted for Gillespie. He said that after the Providence Villanova game. So we'll see who ends up taking it. It's a very talented conference. There's a lot of guys on it, and we're going to do our own awards show later on after the tournament. We're going to talk about who we would pick for our own Big East Player of the Year and some other awards we're going to have. But to a certain extent, you can't go wrong with some of these guys. For what it's worth, KenPom does pick an all-conference team. And their list was Robinson Earl, Mamu, David Duke, Champagne, and Booknight. That was their top 5, and it's hard to argue with that. That's a very good list right there, and that's just about what I would have had. So, they had Duke as the 3rd best player in the conference, though, and I don't think you're going to hear a lot of disagreement from Friar fans.
No, in fact, I think PCBB Twitter was more united today than they've been all season in sharing the discontent with the selections.
Yeah.
And also for any listeners that follow the Providence basketball players on Instagram, they're not happy. They are not happy at all. Jimmy Nichols, Jared Bynum, AJ Reeves, Nate, Duke all took to their stories to let the world know that they did not agree with where their teammates and where they themselves landed. Kyron Cartwright, an alumni who played 1 season with Nate and has not even played with David Duke, was in shock that they weren't selected. So if there's a fire in this Providence team going into Madison Square Garden, every coach in the Big East just took their shovel and started adding fuel to the fire, baby.
Yeah, and let's talk about that.
Light the engine, baby. Come on.
Let's talk about Madison Square Garden. Tournament starts on Wednesday. It's a slightly different format this year. Now with UConn in the fold, only 5 teams get the bye, and there will be 3 games on Wednesday. And with no fans in attendance, the time slots are a little bit different. So it'll be 3, 6, and 9 o'clock on Wednesday, and then noon, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock on Thursday for those 4 games. Let's talk about the standings and some of these matchups, how things ended up shaking out this year, because it's not what we anticipated. Number 1 and number 2 were Villanova and Creighton. And then number 3 is UConn, which I don't think came as much of a shock. Then things started to get interesting. St. John's finishes the season at number 4 after that massive comeback win over Seton Hall. Came back from down 18-0 to start the game.
Woof.
They're going to play Seton Hall in the 4-5 game on Thursday afternoon at Madison Square Garden. That's going to be that rematch, and Seton Hall needs a win to get into the tournament because right now they're off the bubble.
Yep. I think really the top 5, 4 out of the 5 were predicted to be in the top 5. The only sleeper was St. John's, who actually Andy Katz predicted to be in the top 5 of the conference back in October. But given their slow start to the season, I don't think anyone else did. So that was the only real sleeper. Other than that, Providence falls just outside of the top 5. I think where we landed in the final standings is perfectly indicative of the season we had, because with 11 teams, 6 is smack in the middle. So I agree with it because we played as good as the top 5 at points this season. But we also played as bad as the bottom 5. So I think 6 is kind of ideal for us. Like it's very well representative of the season that we had.
It is. I mean, the Friars may have been the most inconsistent team in a conference of inconsistent teams. Friars slotting in at 6th. Then you look below the Friars. Next up, Xavier finishes 7th. They fell apart. Xavier lost 3 out of 4 to end the year. Seton Hall lost 4 in a row to end the year. So that's your 5 seed and your 7 seed. Teams slipping at the end. Your 8 seed ends up being Georgetown, with your 9 being Marquette. Golden Eagles falling all the way there. Your 10 ends up being Butler. And as always, number 11 is DePaul. And that's who the Friars are going to be getting. To me, your biggest shockers here, it's St. John's at 4 and Marquette at 9. And I know you had stuff you wanted to say about Xavier falling below the Friars at 7.
Yeah, really. I'm actually happy that Xavier fell to 7. When they came back from the COVID pause, I felt that there was almost a sense of relief in the way that Travis Steele was kind of addressing the state of the program and where Xavier was positioned. It's almost like they were hoping that they would have all these pauses and no one would notice, and they'd sneak into the top 5 past the Wednesday round. Like, no. Just because you got your 13 games in doesn't mean that you're one of the top teams in the conference. You have to play all the games like everyone else. And guess what? If you don't play all the games and you suck in some of the other games, you're going to fall into Wednesday. I'm happy that Xavier has to play Wednesday because it's almost like, you know what? You missed a ton of games. I get it's COVID, but at some point or another, you have to realize you guys did something to break protocol to have that many pauses. I'm sorry. That may be a hot take, but it happened a lot for them. A
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, Xavier fell below 500. They're right where they should be based on the kind of basketball that they played at the end of the season. And there's going to be opportunities here for Xavier to make a run. They should beat Butler. Xavier's a better team than Butler. I don't think there's any doubt there. And then they get Creighton, and they beat Creighton earlier. I mean, they played Creighton close both times, beat them at home. They're going to have an opportunity for an upset there. If they beat Creighton, they will have earned their way into the NCAA tournament. If they don't, then they're going to be out. It's probably going to be that simple for them, depending on what else happens on the bubble. And likewise for Seton Hall. Seton Hall is probably going to need to beat St. John's. If they beat St. John's and maybe get to the Big East Championship, they're in. You lose that game, they're out. So, and also St. John's. If St. John's beats Seton Hall, they're on the outside of the bubble right now. You beat Seton Hall again and get yourself going. Potentially play a shorthanded Villanova team. St. John's might be in a decent spot. I mean, this is one heck of a chaotic Big East season, and like always, the middle of the pack is very tightly congested with not a lot of wiggle room.
Yep. I was going to say Butler kind of surprised me. I know they were supposed to have a down year, but I didn't think 10th was realistic for them, especially with how well they played at some points. You know, they knocked off Villanova by 12. They knocked off Creighton. They had some quality wins. They weren't, I guess, I don't know. Sometimes the eye test is deceiving because they did lose a ton of games and they didn't really win a lot of games, but the games they did win, they won in style. So I was a little surprised by that. Marquette, I honestly expected. I'll open my notes in my phone right now and go back to my Big East preseason standings that I wrote in October, if I can find it. Big East preseason rankings, 11, 12, 20. You want to hear what I had?
Give it to us.
1 Creighton, 2 Villanova, 3 Providence, 4 Seton Hall, 5 UConn, 6 Xavier, 7 St. John's, 8 DePaul, 9 Butler, 10 Marquette, 11 Georgetown.
Not terribly far off.
I did not think that Wojo was good enough of a coach to keep Marquette in the upper tier of the Big East without Marcus Howard.
Yeah,
Marcus Howard was the best thing to happen to that man.
Yeah, you got the St. John's Marquette swap for the most part. Obviously not the order, but you got them switching tiers here. I do want to mention, because you mentioned Butler, they're one of the few teams in the Big East that had a win against Villanova and Creighton this year. They split with the top 2 teams and went 8-12 in Big East. But yeah, we did. Butler did. Obviously, it shows that just beating them by on its own doesn't make you good. But it's a Butler team that has some upside. Didn't expect them.
Tremendous upside.
Yeah. So we'll see Xavier last year. They fell asleep down the stretch. They lost their last 2 games of the regular season and then lost to DePaul in the very last game that was finished in the Big East tournament last year. So Xavier, and that was in the 7-10 game. And Xavier's well on their way to doing that again. They lose to Butler, which they could do. They're out of the tournament. I do want to get to the Providence DePaul 6-11 matchup. Before we do it, let's briefly touch on this 8-9 game between Georgetown and Marquette. What are your opening thoughts? How do you think this one goes?
I think Georgetown takes it. Historically, Wojo has not coached well at Madison Square Garden for the Big East tournament, especially in recent memory when Marquette was the 2 seed and they were upset by Seton Hall. Specifically from that game, and this really shouldn't stick with me as strongly as it does because it wasn't my team, it wasn't my player, but Wojo refused to shake Miles Powell's hand after the game. Now, I get it. There were a lot of foul calls, and Wojo was obviously pissed about that. But Miles Powell was wearing blue. He wasn't wearing the black and white stripes. He wasn't the referees. And I think this is because Miles Powell thought he got ejected and then came back. And Wojo was like, well, my players thought he got ejected. Okay, well, he didn't. It was a mistake. It's not like he got ejected and they brought him back in. Just because Miles Powell made a mental error and thought he was ejected doesn't mean that you don't shake his hand. Not to mention Miles Powell single-handedly destroyed the Marquette defense and carved them up all over the floor.
Yeah.
So I don't think Wojo coaches well at the Garden. He's got a young team. He's having a bad season. Georgetown's playing with a lot of momentum. I think they're a lot better than people thought. And I think Marquette was one of the teams that came back from down 18 at Georgetown to win by 6 or 4-6. I think Georgetown's going to remember that, and they're going to beat Marquette in the tournament as revenge.
Yeah, that game was at Georgetown. The Hoyas had an 18-point lead in the second half. Marquette came back to win that one, 64-60. So yeah, I mean that's this should be an interesting matchup, and I'll be intrigued to see what happens. The winner is going to get a Villanova team that will be shorthanded and without Gillespie. We don't know the status of Justin Moore yet, but especially if that's Georgetown. Georgetown's a team that's pulled off some upsets this year. If they get a Gillespie-less or Gillespie and Moore-less Villanova after beating Marquette, they could pull an upset. You could potentially see a St. John's Georgetown semifinal, but that's getting really ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about the main event for Friars fans. 9 p.m. Wednesday night, back at Madison Square Garden for the first time in a long time, playing against DePaul. Opening thoughts, Joe?
Well, I think we should mention that off the bat here, DePaul is the last team to win at the Big East tournament, just to win a game in
Yeah.
in recent memory, because the Creighton St. John's game on the Thursday was cut at halftime. So DePaul owns the most recent Big East tournament win. Um, with that
Coming in
said,
with momentum.
with that said, actually, teeing me up perfectly, Providence hopefully can take this Villanova win and use it as a bit of momentum. I think the Duke and Watson being on second team all conference is quite honestly, I think that's a bigger piece of momentum that we're going to try and build off of than the Nova win. If I'm going to be quite honest with you, from the players' reactions and the reactions of the fan base. So I think the Friars are going to come in with a chip on their shoulder. We're 2-0 against DePaul this season, but what frightens me is that in the second game, without Charlie Moore, we only beat them by 10. And that game is a little misleading because we held them to 47 points, but we were not great defensively. DePaul just was not making a lot of shots, which we've seen a
Yeah.
lot. But with a healthy Charlie Moore, this is going to be a different DePaul team.
Yeah. So like you said, Friars swept DePaul this year. Took the first one back in December, 95-90 in double overtime. It's the second most points DePaul scored all season. That was the most points that DePaul allowed. Then later on, 57-47 victory at DePaul out in Chicago. And that was the least points this DePaul defense allowed this season. 2 games to the opposite end of the spectrum. And that second one, we watched that together. No Charlie Moore for DePaul. No Ed Cooley for the Friars. That was the Jeff Battle game. So both sides undermanned there, but Charlie Moore has returned, leading scorer for them, and he's he's a difference maker. So we're gonna have to see what happens. I don't think there's a doubt that the Friars are the better team. It's really a question of whether they're gonna show up and play like it on Wednesday night.
Yeah, Matt, and I think for most Friar fans, it's always fun to beat Villanova. A lot of Friar fans are going to be high off of that win, but I think we need to remember this team is very inconsistent, and they have been the entirety of the season, and we have a very, very difficult time closing out in the second half. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get off to a hot start against DePaul, go up double digits, and then find ourselves, struggling in the second half. It reminds me of that old saying, like where you're not supposed to sprint at the start of a race. It's all about, setting a pace and not sprinting out because then you gas yourself. That's basically what has happened in a majority of games this season. We've been fortunate to outrun teams like Villanova, like Creighton, but this coughing up double-digit leads in the first half and not scoring in the second half and playing lackluster defense, that's gotta be tuned up and really, really fixed for the tournament. You can't be doing that at MSG because one loss and you're out, and then that's it. That might very well be the season.
Yeah, no, I mean you gotta bring your energy. And DePaul's playing with house money. I mean they have nothing to lose here. If they can play spoiler, then that's gonna make their season. They're not playing in the postseason. This is it for them. This is it for that group of guys. So you know that they're gonna bring the energy. The Friars have to find a way to match it, and they're gonna be playing in an empty world's most famous arena. That is basically going to be no fans in attendance, no public tickets. Each team can bring a party of friends and family, so there will be some people there. But I mean, that's one thing. You're playing. The Friars have gone from playing in these small arenas. They're going to go to this really big arena, and you see it at points where teams adjust and go to that big arena and have issues shooting. I think that's going to be even bigger of an issue when there's no fans. I think that's definitely going to impact that. So I think the worry, if you're a Friars fan, is this game goes kind of like the home game against Seton Hall. And you see the team that showed up in the second half against Villanova. Because the Paul's offense is not good, but they're a Big East offense that's good enough to make you pay if you play bad defense and you don't bring energy. And if the Friars don't bring energy on defense, they don't make shots. That's only going to get worse in that arena. And things could get bad in a hurry if that's the case. So that's what you got to avoid. I mean, you have to find a way to start fast but maintain it. Like you said, don't sprint out of the gate. Play at a pace that you're comfortable with.
Not to mention, Matt, the point you made about some fans being in the building, this might be one of the only games or opportunities, rather, where Providence will have home fans rooting for them in the stands. I mean, Ed Cooley said in the post-game presser after the Villanova win that our bread and butter is playing at the Dunkin' Donuts Center in front of 12,500 fans, and that the crowd is like an essential piece to what the team does. So I think if Providence can build momentum in the first half, fans will help us maintain it in the second half. I do think that is a difference maker for us. It's just the culture of Providence basketball that we thrive off of the energy from the crowd. And historically at Madison Square Garden, we've played very well. And Cooley calls it the Dunk South because being a New Yorker, I can attest to this, and it is 100% true. There are a ton of Friar fans in New York City. There's a bar a block and a half away from Madison Square Garden called Jack Dempsey's where Friar fans will swarm to after a Big East tournament win. So the fact that they can have fans in this building and have some sort of cheers from the crowd is going to be huge with respect to momentum. Huge.
Yeah, I think so. And hopefully that'll bring a little bit of energy out of the Friars. It's still going to be a mostly quiet building, but it'll be more energy than they've had at Alumni Hall. And obviously, there's a certain amount of energy when you step into MSG. It's just that building radiates it. You see that Jumbotron, you just see that court, and you know the history that's happened there. I mean, we've been there so many times, and you walk into that building, and you look at the court, and you see the Kemba Walker step back, and you see where Kyron Cartwright made all those plays. And
Cartwright for three.
Yeah.
Pure. That's Gus Johnson. That might be one of my favorite Gus calls of all time. Big East Tournament Championship game. What?
Oh, yeah. And here we go. Love that.
Big East Tournament Finals. 9:02 to go.
And this is, I mean, that building has an energy of its own. But it's going to be intriguing to see how things play out in this environment. And in the Friars, it's tempting to look ahead to a potential rematch with UConn on Thursday, but you can't do it. You got to beat DePaul first. And we're not going to talk about that matchup because we're not thinking past DePaul. And I think the Friars did that a little bit this past week. You're thinking about Villanova, and you lose at home to St. John's, or on the road to St. John's. You can't look ahead to UConn. You have to stay in the now. Friars' only chance at, I think, going to the NCAA tournament is win the Big East tournament. That's the simplest path at this point. So
it's the only path.
Yeah, it starts with a win on Wednesday night. I think we should do some predictions here, Joe. What do you how do you think this game is going to go?
So I know I said I don't want them to get out to a sprinting start in the first half and choke in the second half, but I think that's what's going to happen. Especially given the narrative and the storyline going into this is that Providence survives Villanova at home. David Duke and Nate Watson are snubbed from first-team All-Big East selection. They're going to come out firing. I wouldn't be surprised if the first 10 points, 10, 15 points are all Duke and Watson, just to make a statement. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Cooley feels snubbed too. You heard Big East coaches rant and rave about David Duke all season. They're going to draw plays for him. They're going to draw plays for Watson. Again, you have a size advantage with Watson in the paint. But hey, DePaul, like you said, they're playing with house money. This may be one of the last times they're at Madison Square Garden with Dave Lato. I mean, they gave that man a contract extension, and he produced 2 conference wins this season.
Yeah, but he's not.
That
Yeah.
he's. I can't even formulate a sentence to describe my disbelief in that program and extending that coach's contract. He should not be their head coach. He really should.
Wednesday night might be his last game as their head coach if the Friars
Unless
take
they
care
win.
of business. Yeah,
Okay. Good.
both
Good
teams
follow up.
both teams are going to be motivated for this one. I think the Friars are going to take it. I think it's going to be close, but definitive. I'm going to say something in the high 60s, the high 60s for the Friars, high 50s for DePaul. I think both defenses show up. I think the Friars are going to be a little bit iffy on offense at points against a good DePaul defense, but you're going to see both teams play a little bit more effectively than they did in the second meeting out in Chicago.
Yeah.
So then you're
I
going to see a little
think
bit more motivation, especially with Charlie Moore there for DePaul.
I think you're exactly right. I'm going to say around the same thing. I'm going to say low 70s, high for the Friars, high 50s for DePaul. I think in the final minutes or the final minute, you know what I mean, crunched garbage time, we'll get a couple of easy breakaways to pad the score. My X factor is going to be David Duke because I mean, if there's anyone who should feel snubbed, it's him. I mean, obviously, if I'm Watson, I'm pissed too because I'm the only true center. But with respect to the three other guards in first team All Big East, Duke knows he's more athletic than all three of them.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that he can play better than all three of them. So this is gonna be like I'm expecting a Chiron Cartwright 2018-esque Big East tournament performance from Duke. We saw glimpses of him being that dog type player against Villanova. I hope he brings that mentality to every game this week. And by every game, I mean this game, because right now we only have one game. That's the mentality from us going into it. The mentality from him should be, I'm making a name for myself this week.
Yeah. And that's what it is. Friars have to bring the energy, have to bring their A game, and it starts with the leaders. Duke, Watson, Horkler, the veterans. These are the guys that need to show up and show out in a game like this for you to win. And I mean, this is the biggest stage. When Noah Horkler or Jared Bynum or Ed Croswell or Bryson Goodine or any of these freshmen, when these guys sign up to play for the Friars, you're coming because you know you're playing in Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena. And this is why you do it. I mean, you think Noah Horkler's going to get this chance to play there in that building again? Unless he returns next season. But I mean, if he's done, this is his last chance to do that. Nate Watson's going to be there again? Probably not. He might go to the NBA, but I don't know if he's that good. This might be the last chance these guys get to play in that arena. So you know that they're going to do what they can to make the best of it. Got to come out on fire and just play good basketball. This is what it's all about. This is what you live for right here. I think that'll do it for this one. It's gonna be Wednesday night at 9:00 for the opener. That'll be on Fox Sports 1. The Friars win. They'll play 9. Yeah, I know they got the late game. It's gonna be the late game all the way through. If they win, they'll play UConn 9:00 on Thursday night. And just to give you the idea of the bracket, if they win that one, the semifinal will be 9:00 again Friday night against Creighton, Xavier, or Butler. That's the path the Friars are looking at, and after that, 6:30 Saturday, that's your championship. That's your goal. That's what the Friars are working towards, but it starts against DePaul. Friars 2-0 against them this season, looking for that elusive third win. We'll see if they can get it done. For us here at The Flex, for Joe Howie, I'm Matt St. Jean. Thank you for listening. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at The Flex Hoops.
For the first time in the postseason, go Friars.